Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I am your host, Eric Smith, and today I'm talking about The Light at the End by John Skipp and Craig Spector. This is a new edition from Fathom Press, part of their Savage Harvest line. And I'm just going to read back cover copy. It's the end of the line. Something is lurking in the shadows beneath New York City, leaving a trail of mutilated bodies in its wake. The tabloids scream, "Subway Psycho," and the police hunt for a killer, but they're both wrong, because what they're looking for isn't even human. A group of strangers drawn together by the same grim realization knows the truth. Rudy Pascoe, driven by an insatiable thirst for blood and a savage hunger for revenge, has been reborn as a creature of the night. But what chance does Joseph Hunter and his motley crew have against a creature that thrives in the darkness? Deep beneath the city, where the night never ends, the hunt has begun. So this is a vampire novel, and for the too long didn't watch folks, 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely love this book. I've read it at least half a dozen times. It came out originally in 1986. John Skipp and Craig Spector, the godfathers of the splatterpunk movement, in my opinion. It was their first original novel. Before this, they had a novelization of the movie Fright Night. And it was the second novel by them that I read. And I had read previously a bunch of their short stories, even though I didn't know it. But this is the book that just absolutely blew my mind. The first one I read, The Cleanup, was also fantastic. I'll probably reread that and review it at some point. But this one, for the longest time, was my favorite book ever. Now I remember why. This has an introduction from R.C. Matheson that I'm not a fan of. Not a fan of the introduction. Nothing against R.C. Matheson. I've read his stuff. He's fine. But not a fan of the style in which he writes this introduction. But, that being said, the rest of the book, as it was all of the other times I read it, is absolutely fantastic. We start with a cold open on the subway, and there's a slaughter. Rudy Pascoe gets on the subway when I think most of the slaughtering is done, but he becomes a victim, and he becomes, no spoiler really, a vampire. And so we meet slowly but surely our cast of characters. Joseph Hunter, who works for a messenger service, and there's a bunch of other people that work for that messenger service that are also going to be part of our crew. Rudy's ex-girlfriend, Rudy's best friend, but Rudy, just an angry piece of shit guy to begin with, and now he's even worse that he's a vampire, and we get to see him come into his vampiric powers, but we also see a bunch of the aftermath of that original slaughter, and we see the things that Rudy is doing before he's fully aware, and this is a pretty thick book. This edition, oddly enough, 485 pages. I have the 1986 paperback, which is 385 pages. So that's just, paper thickness, font size. One other factor, it's in the original, when a chapter ended, the next chapter immediately began, whereas the next chapter is on the next page. And so sometimes you'll have a chapter end and the page will just have a few sentences, and so you've got a lot of blank space because the next chapter starts on the next page. That's going to contribute to increasing the page count. That's all neither here nor there. But Skipp and Spector, their writing is absolutely fantastic. It's very punk rock writing, in my opinion. Those who ever watch my reviews know that I'm not one of those lyrical reviewers that can dig deep into the stuff. I just talk about what I like, and I really love Skipp and Spector's style when they're writing together, and it New York is as much of a character as the people. It evokes New York of the mid '80s, before areas were cleaned up. There's sleaze and there's dirt and there's darkness and the grimy subways and some of the grimy streets, and there's a lot of people smoking in here, in buildings, and just the traffic. You've got these messenger people. Joseph Hunter drives in a van, but there's one guy that's on roller skates, and again, dealing with the pedestrians and the traffic. And Skipp and Spector are able to, make New York within the book a living, breathing part of the story. There's lots of terror in here. There's lots of gore. It's not nearly as gory as a lot of extreme horror and probably other splatterpunk, but there are some pretty gruesome scenes. And it's been so long since I've read it, since the last time I read it, that I didn't really remember any details at all. But as I was reading it, I'm reading along, and I'd go, "Oh, I know what's coming up. I know what this scene is." Did not change the effectiveness of what I was reading, and that happened multiple times throughout the book. But it's a fantastic punk rock vampire story. There are things I want to tell you, but I'm not going to, because I don't want to potentially spoil anything. It's the characters are fantastic. There's some iffy language, and if you go to Fathom Press and order this from them, in the description it does say, on this and some of the other books, I think all of the other books they've reprinted in this Savage Harvest line, says that basically, this was written in another time, and so there's things in it that today are considered much more offensive than they necessarily were back then. And some of the female characters maybe not the most well-rounded, but there's no, in my opinion, misogyny from the authors. There might be characters that are misogynistic, but I don't think the authors were in any way. Just maybe some of the female characters not as fully fleshed out as their male counterparts. But Joseph Hunter is a great character. Ian and Alan are fantastic. Jocelyn is Rudy's ex, and some interesting things going on there. And there's an old man who survived the Holocaust, and they talk about the things he's seen and how you can see it. You can see the tragedies on his face, and he recognizes what's going on, and becomes part of this group of hunters. There are a few coincidences I didn't really think about it when I was reading it back in the day, but in this read through, my understanding, New York is a big place with a lot of people, and so it just seemed a little coincidental that certain characters would run into each other at certain times in certain places. There's a scene where Ian, I think it's Ian, is sitting in a bar, and two subway workers come in, sit down at the bar next to him, and start talking about this horrific thing that they saw in the subway. And I was just thinking, what are the chances that of all the bars in New York City, these guys walk into the one in which one of our main characters is sitting? And so there's a few things like that, which I thought about in the Repairman Jack books by F. Paul Wilson. there's a point where a character says there are no coincidences. And so anything like this, that in Repairman Jack one would think, well, that's a pretty big coincidence. It's like, well, no, these cosmic forces that are at play are moving the chess pieces around, essentially. But we don't have that in this book, so it just felt sometimes stretching things. But maybe that's just me. If you've read this, let me know how you feel about that. Anyway, The Light at the End is just an amazingly well-written, original-ish take on the vampire. I think, for me at least, before this, vampires were all of the Dracula variety, and I really loved that you just have this punk rock kind of guy. That might be an insult to punk rock, because he's pretty shitty. He's a pretentious graffiti artist, just, as I said, piece of shit, but not what up until this point I thought of as a vampire, a main vampire character. And so I really, really liked that it was something different. This is before I'd read this before I'd ever read Anne Rice, and I'm not a fan of Anne Rice. I read Interview with the Vampire, and I'm not a fan of those romantic, emo vampires. This is definitely, Rudy Pascoe is definitely a monster. And there's some great scenes with him coming into his vampiric powers. I'm trying to avoid spoilers, as always. So, The Light at the End, John Skipp and Craig Spector. Definitely my favorite vampire novel. Still up there with my favorite books of all time. I absolutely love this. And I highly, highly recommend it. And if you can't find an original, pick up this very cool Fathom Press edition. I really, really like that cover. So there you have it. And question for this video: are you a fan of vampires? What's your favorite vampire story? Have you read this book? What do you think of it? I have been up and down on vampires. As I said, back in the day, back in the 80s, read this over and over again. It was my favorite book of all time for a long time. Does that make sense? Could it be your favorite book of all time if it eventually is no longer your favorite book of all time? It was my favorite book for decades. But there was a time when I said, I've been quoted as saying, vampires are the Jar Jar Binks of the monster world. And that has a lot to do with the romanticization? Making them all romantic and emo and, oh, my tragic vampire life. Not a fan of that at all. I want my vampires monstrous. I've always liked Marvel Comics version of Dracula. Tomb of Dracula, fantastic comic book. Dracula, I mean, it's a classic for a reason. But there was a time when I was not a fan. But there are still some great vampire books out there. There are some new vampire books coming out that are good. So they're not my favorite, but they've definitely redeemed themselves recently. And I seem to be reading more and more vampire books of late, over the last few years. What are your thoughts? Are you a fan? What's your favorite story, book or movie? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here at the Low Budget Review Show. Please like, share, and subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. If you'd care to follow me on other social media, I'll have links for my Instagram and Blue Sky in the description below. That's all I've got. This has been the Low Budget Review Show. I have been Eric Smith. And until next time, read more books.